The Old Suitcase in the Attic. Part 1. The Dust Above the Ceiling. The house was quiet that afternoon, the kind of silence that feels almost deliberate, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Outside, the wind pressed its cold hands against the windows, carrying with it the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and the distant hum of cars on the main road. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug in his hands. The coffee had gone cold long ago, but he hadn't noticed. His mind was elsewhere, circling the same restless thoughts that had followed him all week. He had taken a few days off work after his mother's funeral, telling his colleagues it was to settle family matters. But in truth, it wasn't the paperwork or the endless phone calls with distant relatives that occupied him. It was the house. His mother's house, now his. It wasn't large, just an aging two-story home at the edge of town, where the grass grew too wild and the paint on the shutters peeled like old bark. Daniel had grown up here, every corner of it steeped in memory. But as he walked its halls now, the place felt foreign, almost like it had been holding secrets from him all these years. That day, as he set the mug down with a hollow clink, he glanced toward the narrow wooden ladder that led to the attic. He had always hated that space. As a child, he imagined shadows living there, creatures crouched in the rafters, waiting. His mother rarely went up either, except when she needed to store boxes of clothes or holiday decorations. Yet something tugged at him now, a thought, soft but insistent. Go look. The attic door creaked as he pulled the ladder down. Dust spiraled in the shaft of light like tiny spirits rising. Daniel coughed, the musty air scratching at his throat. He climbed carefully, one hand on the rail, the wood groaning under his weight. The attic greeted him with the smell of time itself, dust, wood, and something faintly metallic. He flicked on the bare bulb that hung from the center beam. Its weak glow revealed a cluttered landscape, old trunks, boxes sagging with age, stacks of yellowed newspapers. And then he saw it. A suitcase. It sat near the far wall, half hidden beneath a moth-eaten blanket. Unlike the other things, this one seemed deliberate, as though someone had placed it there with intention. The leather was worn but intact, the brass latches tarnished. Its surface bore scratches, scars of travel, and in one corner a faded sticker, letters barely visible. Paris, 1957. Daniel froze. His family, as far as he knew, had never been to Paris. His grandparents were simple people, bound to their farm and later to this very house. His parents had traveled only modestly, holidays to the seaside, nothing more. Paris didn't fit. Heart beating a little faster, he crouched down and ran his fingers over the surface. The leather was cold, gritty with dust. He tried the handle. It was stiff but solid. Then, with a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, he pressed the latches. Click. The suitcase opened with a sigh, like it had been waiting all these years to breathe again. Inside, neatly arranged despite the decades, were objects that seemed to belong to a different world. Old photographs, their edges curled and browned. Documents tied with a fraying ribbon. A silk scarf, delicate and faintly perfumed even now, carrying the ghost of a scent he couldn't name. A fountain pen with initials engraved, ER. And at the very bottom, a small, leather-bound notebook. Its cover cracked, its pages swollen from age. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the notebook out. For a moment, he simply held it, staring at the initials embossed in gold. ER again, those letters. They meant nothing to him. No one in his family had those initials. He sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the weak bulb buzzing overhead, and opened the notebook. The first page carried a date in elegant handwriting, March 3rd, 1956. Daniel blinked. 1956. This was more than a decade before he was even born. He began to read. The air in Paris is different, alive, almost electric. I don't know if I belong here, but I feel as though I am finally breathing for the first time. Today I walked along the Seine and promised myself that I would not let fear chain me again. Daniel's lips parted. He had never seen handwriting like this in his family before, careful, flowing, almost artistic. Whoever had written this wasn't just recording events, they were living them with passion, with longing. He turned the page, then another, skimming words about cafe tables, conversations with strangers, dreams of art, and a longing for freedom. And then he stopped at one sentence, underlined twice in bold ink. If they ever find out the truth back home, everything will change. A chill prickled down his spine. He set the notebook down, his mind racing. Who was ER? What truth? And why had all this been hidden away in his mother's attic, unspoken, untouched? The silence pressed in around him, heavier now. He looked at the suitcase again, its contents waiting to be explored. Somewhere within these objects was a story his family had never told him, a story that might unravel everything he thought he knew. And for the first time since his mother's passing, Daniel felt a spark ignite within him. Curiosity. Whatever secrets this suitcase held, he knew one thing for certain. His life would not be the same once he uncovered them. Part 2, the first photographs. Daniel carried the suitcase downstairs that evening, brushing cobwebs from his hair. The old wood groaned beneath his steps, as if the house itself disapproved of what he'd found. In the living room, he set the case on the coffee table. The room smelled faintly of lavender, his mother's scent, still lingering in the cushions, stubborn as memory. He sat down slowly, almost reverently, and laid out the contents. Each item seemed like a fragment of a puzzle. Photographs in black and white, brittle documents with official stamps, a silk scarf that still whispered of someone's presence. His eyes fell first on the photographs. He picked one up carefully, holding it by the corners. The image showed a young woman standing on a Paris street. She wore a simple dress and a confident smile, her hair pinned back. Behind her, the Eiffel Tower stretched into the sky like a promise. Daniel frowned. The woman looked familiar, but not in a way he could place. Her cheekbones, her eyes, there was something in them that stirred a memory. He squinted, bringing the photo closer. It hit him. The woman looked like his mother. Not exactly. This woman was younger, perhaps in her early 20s, and there was a spark in her expression that Daniel had never seen in his mother's eyes. His mother had been warm, yes, but also restrained, cautious. This woman radiated a freedom that didn't fit the mother he had known. He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in the same elegant hand as the notebook, were the words, Elise, Paris, 1956. Daniel's breath caught. Elise. His mother's name was Anna. Elise meant nothing to him, yet the resemblance was undeniable. Could it be a coincidence, a relative he had never heard of? He sifted through more photographs. A cafe scene. The same woman laughing across a table at a man whose face was half turned from the camera. A riverside shot, her leaning against the stone rail, the wind tugging at her scarf. And then one that made Daniel's pulse quicken, a close-up, taken indoors, where the woman's eyes stared straight into the lens with an intensity that almost felt alive. And again on the back the same inscription, Elise. Daniel set the photo down, his fingers trembling. He whispered into the silence of the room. Who are you? The house gave no answer, only the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. He reached for the documents next. The first bundle was tied with ribbon, stiff and frayed with age. Inside were letters, some in French, others in English. He unfolded one carefully. My dearest Elise, the nights feel endless without you. I watch the trains leave the station and wonder if you are among the faces in the windows. I pray we will meet again in Paris. Until then, I carry your words close to me. The letter trailed on, filled with yearning, with a love Daniel had never known his mother to receive or give. His father, a quiet, practical man, had died years ago. Their marriage had been steady, dutiful, but never passionate. At least, not in the way these letters burned with feeling. The signature at the bottom of the letter was a single initial, A. Daniel's mind reeled. An unknown man. A woman named Elise who looked like his mother. A suitcase full of secrets. He rubbed his temples, trying to steady himself. Part of him wanted to close the suitcase, shove it back into the attic and forget what he'd seen. But another part, the stronger part, knew he couldn't. He picked up the notebook again, turning to a later page. I am torn between two lives, the one I left behind and the one I have found here. I fear the truth will destroy everything. But how can I go back, knowing what freedom feels like? Daniel exhaled shakily. Whoever this Elise was, she had been living a double life, a hidden one. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to his mother's quiet nature, the way she had avoided talking about her youth. Whenever he asked about her past, she'd smile faintly and say, "Oh, there's nothing to tell, Daniel, just ordinary days." Ordinary days. The phrase now rang false. The clock chimed softly, pulling him back to the present. The room had grown darker, shadows stretching long across the floor. Daniel gathered the items back into the suitcase, though he left the notebook on the coffee table. He couldn't stop thinking about it, about the woman in the photos. Before going to bed, he paused in front of the old mirror in the hallway. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, hair mussed, lines of grief still etched in his face. But behind his own features, he saw hints of hers, his mother's eyes, her cheekbones. And suddenly, a thought chilled him. What if Elise wasn't just some stranger? What if she was his mother, living a life he had never known, under a name she had buried long before Daniel was born? The possibility lodged itself in his chest, sharp and heavy. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought dreams of cobbled streets, train stations, and a woman's voice whispering words in French he couldn't understand. And in every dream, the suitcase was there, waiting. Part 3, The Notebook Speaks. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of rain drumming softly against the windows. The world outside was gray, wrapped in mist, and for a moment he lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the night before had been real. But then his eyes landed on the coffee table. The notebook sat there, dark and waiting. Daniel rose, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat down in the same spot as last night. He opened the notebook with a mix of anticipation and unease, like he was about to trespass into someone else's soul. The handwriting sprawled across the page was steady, elegant, alive. April 12, 1956. We walked along the river today, and he told me again that I should stay. That there is a life for me here if only I am brave enough to claim it. I want to believe him, but the thought of facing my family back home burns in my chest. They would never forgive me. They would not understand. Daniel's brows furrowed. Who was he? The writer didn't name him, but the letters he'd seen, the ones signed only with A, echoed through his mind. He turned the page. May 1st, 1956. I wore the scarf he gave me, the silk one the color of the spring sky. He laughed when he saw me, said it made me look like I belonged to Paris. I wish I could bottle the sound of his laughter, carry it with me always. I fear I will lose it one day, the way I have lost so many other things. Daniel reached over and picked up the scarf from the suitcase. The faint perfume still clung to it, as though preserved in time. He brought it to his face, inhaling. The scent was faint, floral, delicate. For a moment he closed his eyes and imagined the woman in the notebook, Elise, walking the streets of Paris, laughing, living a life full of choices his mother never spoke of. When he opened his eyes again, he felt the weight of dissonance. Could his mother, Anna, the cautious woman who raised him, truly have been this vibrant, passionate Elise? He read further. June 7th, 1956. I cannot write the truth here, for fear that one day these words will fall into the wrong hands. But in my heart, I know what we are, and I know what we are not allowed to be. Daniel sat back slowly. Not allowed. His pulse quickened. Whatever this was, this relationship, Elise had carried it in secret. Perhaps it had been forbidden, scandalous. That would explain why it was hidden away, why no one ever spoke of it. He turned several pages forward. The tone of the writing shifted. August 18th, 1956. The news from home grows heavier. Letters from my family urge me to return. They say I am needed, that my absence is shameful. But every part of me screams to resist. Here I am myself. Here I am free, yet I cannot abandon them. I am torn in two, and whichever choice I make, a piece of me will die. Daniel's throat tightened as he read the words aloud, softly, as though tasting them. A piece of me will die. He thought of his own life, the choices he had made, the compromises. He had lived safely, predictably. A steady job, a modest apartment, weekends spent with friends but never stepping too far outside the lines. Was that inherited? Had his mother raised him to be cautious because she herself had lived recklessly once and paid for it? His eyes drifted to the photos again. Eliza's smile, her eyes burning with life. Then to the letters, full of yearning. And then back to the notebook. He turned the page. September 2nd, 1956. Today I told him I could not stay. His face broke in a way I will never forget. He said love like ours does not die, no matter how much time passes. He pressed the pen into my hand, the one with his initials, and said, "Write, Eliza, write so you will remember." And then he walked away. Daniel's heart pounded. The pen. He glanced at the fountain pen resting inside the suitcase, the initials ER carved into its side. It suddenly felt heavier, more significant. The initials. He whispered them aloud. ER. It didn't match the man from the letters. Unless the pen had belonged to Eliza herself. Perhaps the R was her surname. Or perhaps another man was involved. The thought unsettled him. A triangle of names, of fragments. A love that seemed to pulse still through the ink of those pages. As Daniel sat in silence, the rain outside softened to a drizzle. The room felt charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, what did you hide from me?" The words felt strange in the quiet. But as he closed the notebook gently, he realized he already knew the answer. She had hidden an entire life, a life that perhaps was never meant to be found. And yet, he had found it. He placed the notebook back on the table, his decision already forming. Tomorrow, he would visit his Aunt Margaret, his mother's elder sister, the only relative still nearby. She was the keeper of stories, the one who remembered. If anyone knew who Eliza was or what the truth was, it would be her. For now, though, he sat in silence, the suitcase open before him, the rain whispering against the windows. He felt as though he had opened a door to the past, and there was no closing it again. Because once the past speaks, it never truly goes silent. Part 4, Aunt Margaret's silence. The next day was brighter, the rain washed away, though the air still carried a damp chill. Daniel drove the narrow road out of town toward his Aunt Margaret's cottage, a small white house nestled at the edge of a field. He hadn't visited her in months, maybe longer. Life had gotten busy, and after his mother's passing, the distance between them had felt even greater. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw her at the window, drawing back the curtain with her frail hand. Her figure was thinner than he remembered, her once dark hair now a full crown of silver. Yet her eyes, when she opened the door for him, were sharp as ever. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice a mixture of warmth and surprise. "I didn't expect you." "I know," Daniel replied, forcing a small smile. I needed to talk." She stepped aside, letting him in. The house smelled of old books and lavender polish, just as it always had. Photographs lined the mantel, family gatherings, weddings, children at play. Daniel scanned them briefly, noting the absence of one face. There were no pictures of his mother before her marriage. Margaret guided him into the sitting room and poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. She watched him carefully as he settled into the armchair. "What's troubling you, dear?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. He hadn't rehearsed what he would say. Finally, he leaned forward. "I went up into Mom's attic yesterday. I found a suitcase." Her teacup clinked faintly against the saucer. For a moment, she said nothing, but Daniel noticed the way her knuckles tightened around the handle. "A suitcase," she repeated, her voice steady but quieter. "Yes," Daniel said. "Old, with photographs, letters, a notebook from the 1950s. They all belonged to someone named Eliza." Silence. Margaret's gaze dropped to her tea, and when she spoke again, her words were measured. "You shouldn't go digging in the past, Daniel. Some things are better left where they are." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Do you know who she was, Eliza?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She stirred her tea absently, though it didn't need stirring. Finally, she looked up, her eyes shining with something Daniel couldn't name, fear, maybe, or sorrow. "Why do you ask me that?" she whispered. "Because she looks like Mom," Daniel said, his voice firmer now. "In the photographs, she could be her twin. And the letters, the diary, they're full of things I don't understand. I need to know the truth, Aunt Margaret. Was Mom, was Anna, Elise?" The room grew heavy with silence. Margaret set her cup down with trembling hands, then rose and walked to the window. She stood there a long moment, staring out at the gray sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Your mother, she wanted that part of her life buried. She made me promise never to tell you." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "So it's true," he said, barely above a whisper. Margaret turned, her face etched with grief. "Yes, your mother was Elise." Daniel's breath left him in a rush. He had suspected, but hearing the words spoken aloud shook him. His mother, who had always been so careful, so quiet, she had once been someone else entirely. Someone bold enough to take another name, to leave, to live a secret life. "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking. "Why would she hide that from me? Why pretend?" Margaret's eyes softened. "Because the world wasn't kind to her, Daniel. Choices she made, love she had, it wasn't the sort of story you could share without consequence. She wanted to protect you from it." "Protect me from what?" Daniel pressed. "The truth." Margaret shook her head. "From pain, from judgment, from knowing things about her that would change how you saw her. She wanted you to remember her as she was, your mother, not the woman she once was in Paris." Daniel leaned back, his heart pounding. He thought of the letters, the notebook, the scarf, all the fragments of a woman he had never known. "There was a man," Daniel said slowly. "Someone who wrote to her, someone who signed his letters with an A." Margaret flinched. Her silence was answer enough. "Who was he?" Daniel demanded. Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "Don't ask questions you're not ready to have answered, Daniel." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I deserve to know. She was my mother. If there was a whole other life she lived, if she loved someone else, I need to understand." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached for him, but her hand fell short. "She loved you, Daniel, more than anything. That is the truth you need to hold on to." But Daniel shook his head. "That's not enough." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked on the mantel, loud in the silence. Finally, Margaret sighed and sank back into her chair, defeated. "All I will tell you is this. The man in those letters, he was not your father, but he was the great love of her life. And when she returned from Paris, she left him behind. She never spoke his name again." Daniel felt the words like a blow. His father, the man who had raised him, had not been his mother's true love. She had carried that love in silence, buried in an attic suitcase, never sharing it with anyone. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered, his throat tight. Margaret looked at him with sorrowful eyes. "Because love can be a blessing, Daniel, but it can also be a wound, and some wounds never heal." The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel sank back into his chair, stunned. In that moment, he realized he was standing at the edge of something far deeper than he had imagined. The suitcase was not just a collection of old keepsakes. It was the key to a story of passion, sacrifice, and silence that had shaped his very existence. And he was only beginning to uncover it. Part 5, the photograph of the unknown man. Daniel drove home in silence, his aunt's words echoing in his mind. Not your father, the great love of her life. The road blurred beneath him, the fields stretching endlessly, but all he could see was the look in Margaret's eyes, equal parts sorrow and warning. By the time he returned to the house, dusk had settled, turning the windows to mirrors of the fading light. He carried the suitcase back into the living room, as though gravity itself pulled him toward it. He needed to see everything again, carefully this time. He laid the contents out once more. The notebook, the scarf, the letters, the photographs. He picked them up one by one, searching for anything he had overlooked. And then he found it. It was tucked inside the lining, almost hidden, an envelope pressed flat against the fabric. The glue had weakened with age, and it tore easily under his fingers. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel froze. The image showed a man in his late 20s, perhaps early 30s. He was standing on a cobbled street, leaning casually against a lamppost. His hair was dark, swept back, and his eyes carried an intensity that seemed to burn through the decades. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking slightly away, as though distracted by something just beyond the frame. But there was a presence about him, undeniable. Daniel turned the photo over. On the back, in the same graceful handwriting, were 3 words. Adrian, Paris, 1956. His heart quickened. Adrian. So this was the man from the letters. The one his mother, Elise, had loved. Daniel stared at the photo for a long time, studying every detail. Adrian's clothes were simple but neat. A collared shirt, trousers, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His stance was relaxed, but his expression was sharp, alive. Daniel could almost imagine him laughing, speaking in a low voice across a cafe table, slipping a silk scarf across Elise's shoulders. The image felt hauntingly alive, as though Adrian might step out of it and into the room. Daniel set the photo down carefully, his mind spinning. He whispered the name aloud, testing it. Adrian. The sound filled the quiet room, strange and intimate, as though he had stumbled into a prayer never meant for him. His thoughts raced. If his mother had loved this man, if Adrian had been the center of her world in Paris, then what had happened? Why had she left him behind? Why had she come home, married Daniel's father, and buried that part of her life under dust and silence? He reached for the notebook again, flipping quickly through the pages, searching for the name. But Elise never wrote it, not once. She had been careful, painfully careful. The closest she had come were the references to him, always veiled, always unnamed. But now Daniel had a face, a name. Adrian. He leaned back, his hand running through his hair. Questions multiplied in his mind. Was Adrian still alive? Could anyone still remember him? Was there a chance, however small, that someone in town, someone who had known his mother's generation, would recall whispers of the man she had once loved? As he sat there, the clock chimed, startling him. The hour had grown late, the room dark but for the small lamp at his side. Daniel gathered the photograph, holding it as though it were fragile glass. His eyes flicked to the scarf again, then to the pen, and finally to the notebook. Each object was a breadcrumb, a clue pointing to a story his mother had wanted hidden. But the truth had a way of surfacing, and now, it seemed, it demanded to be known. Daniel whispered into the silence, his voice steadier than he felt. I'll find you, Adrian. I'll find out what happened. As the words left his lips, he felt a strange certainty settle in his chest. This was no longer just curiosity. It was a journey he had to take, for himself and for the memory of his mother. The suitcase was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a map, and he had just uncovered the first landmark. And deep down, he knew, the path ahead would change him forever. Part 6, Whispers in Town. The following morning, Daniel drove into town. The streets were familiar, but he looked at them with new eyes, as though every corner might conceal a forgotten story. The photograph of Adrian burned in his pocket, folded neatly but heavy as stone. He started at the public library. Its tall, echoing halls smelled of paper and dust, the same scent he remembered from childhood afternoons spent with his mother, when she would encourage him to pick a book that smelled like it had secrets. Behind the desk sat Mrs. Keating, the town librarian for as long as Daniel could remember. Her hair was snow-white now, her glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up when he approached. "Daniel," she said warmly, "it's been a long while." "Yes," he admitted. "I've been busy." He hesitated, then pulled the folded photograph from his pocket. "I was hoping you might recognize someone from years ago, the 50s maybe." Her brow furrowed as she took the photo and peered at it. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked back at Daniel, her voice cautious. "Where did you get this?" "It was among my mother's things," Daniel said carefully. "Do you know him?" Mrs. Keating's lips pressed thin. "Not well, but yes. That's Adrian Rouso. He came to town briefly many years ago. There was talk. Daniel leaned forward. Talk? What kind of talk? She slid the photo back to him, lowering her voice. Your mother was a young woman then, beautiful, spirited. Everyone expected her to marry your father, but Adrian appeared charming, mysterious from somewhere else. Paris, I think. People whispered that Anna, that is, your mother, had feelings for him, but it ended suddenly. He left and she stayed. Daniel's pulse quickened. It aligned with the suitcase, the notebook, the letters. Why did he leave? Mrs. Keating hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the other patrons. Then she leaned closer. Because he had to. There was trouble, Daniel, trouble that followed him here. Some said politics, others said debts. But your mother never spoke of it, and after Adrian vanished, she married your father within the year. Daniel sat back, stunned. Trouble. That word echoed in his chest. The Adrian he imagined, the romantic figure, the lover, suddenly had shadows clinging to him. Mrs. Keating touched his hand gently. Be careful with the past, Daniel. Sometimes it doesn't stay where you expect it. He thanked her, though his mind was already racing ahead. From the library, he drove to the edge of town, to the little cafe where old neighbors still gathered. Inside, he spotted Mr. Harding, a wiry man in his 80s who had lived next to his grandparents' farm. Daniel approached, pulling up a chair. Mr. Harding, he began cautiously, do you remember a man named Adrian Rouso? The old man's eyes sharpened immediately. He set down his coffee with a thud. Adrian, I remember him. Tall fellow, sharp dresser. Didn't trust him then, don't trust the memory now. Daniel frowned. Why not? Harding leaned closer, his voice low. He wasn't here for honest reasons, lad. I heard he was mixed up in things, foreign politics, smuggling maybe. Came sniffing around your mother, turned her head for a while. But good sense won out. She stayed, he left, and that was the end of it. Daniel swallowed hard. Do you know where he went? The old man shook his head. No one does. He disappeared like smoke. The words chilled Daniel, a man who appeared and vanished, carrying secrets. It didn't fit neatly into the romantic story the letters painted. And yet, his mother had loved him, enough to write pages of longing, enough to preserve his photograph. As Daniel drove home, the first twist of doubt crept in. What if Adrian wasn't the tragic love story he imagined, but something darker? What if his mother's silence wasn't only about protecting her heart, but protecting Daniel from truths that could still burn? That night, Daniel sat again before the suitcase. He spread the objects before him like pieces on a chessboard. The scarf, the notebook, the letters, the photograph of Adrian. He whispered the man's name again, but it tasted different now. Adrian. Not just a lover, not just a ghost, perhaps a danger. The thought unsettled him deeply, but another thought stirred even stronger. If his mother had carried this secret her entire life, then surely there was more still hidden. Somewhere in the notebook, in the letters, perhaps lay the answer, not only to who Adrian was, but to why she left him behind. And Daniel knew he would not stop until he found it. Part 7, The Hidden Letter. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The shadows of the room stretched long, and every creak of the house seemed to remind him of the attic and the secrets it had hidden. Finally, unable to bear the weight of his thoughts, he switched on the lamp and reached again for the notebook. The pages crackled under his fingers, familiar yet still withholding. He had read so many entries already, but something told him there was more, something tucked away. Slowly, carefully, he turned through the pages, holding them up to the light. And then he saw it, a faint bulge in the spine, where two pages pressed unevenly together. His pulse quickened. He slid his finger along the edge and found a folded slip of paper, thin and yellowed, hidden within the binding. With trembling hands, he pulled it free. It was a letter, short, hurried, written in the same elegant hand as the diary, but with none of its usual grace. The ink was blotched, as though written in haste. Adrian, I do not know if I can continue this. I am afraid. They watch me when I return home, ask questions I cannot answer. They say you are dangerous, that your cause will destroy you and me with you. I want to believe in you, but every day it grows harder. If you love me, tell me the truth. No more half-shadows, no more secrets. Elise. Daniel's chest tightened as he read the words aloud in a whisper. They say you are dangerous. His mother, Elise, had doubted him. The woman who wrote pages of longing and love had also lived with fear. He turned the letter over, but there was nothing else. Just her words, raw and uncertain. Daniel sat back heavily, running a hand through his hair. His aunt's warnings, Mr. Harding's suspicions, even Mrs. Keating's careful tone, it all aligned. Adrian Rousseau had not only been a lover. He had been a man surrounded by whispers, rumors of politics, debts, maybe worse. But what cause had he served? What secrets had he kept from her? Daniel returned to the notebook, combing through entries with sharper eyes now. And there, buried in one of the later passages, he found a line that made his blood run cold. Sometimes when he speaks, there is a fire in his eyes I do not recognize, a fire that frightens me. He talks of change, of justice, of fighting shadows I cannot see. I love him, but I fear the world he belongs to is not one I can follow. Daniel whispered the words again, slowly. A fire that frightens me. This was not the tender, romantic Adrian of the scarf and riverside strolls. This was a man caught in something larger, something dangerous. Daniel stood abruptly, packing the room. His mind whirled with questions. Had Adrian been part of some political movement in Paris? Was he hunted? Was that why he vanished, why his mother returned and buried the past? He stopped in front of the mirror in the hallway. His reflection stared back, haunted, uncertain, but burning with determination. I need answers, he said to the empty house. Real ones. As he spoke, his eyes drifted again to the suitcase, to the photograph of Adrian leaning against the lamppost, alive with intensity. And for the first time, Daniel felt not just curiosity but dread. What if finding Adrian's truth meant discovering something about his mother, something darker than he could bear? He returned to the table and placed the hidden letter beside the photograph. Two fragments of the same story, one of love, one of fear. And suddenly, a thought struck him with terrifying clarity. What if Adrian wasn't just a lost love? What if he was the reason his mother had hidden her past? Part 8, The Historian's Files. The following afternoon, Daniel drove to the university in the neighboring city. It was a place he hadn't visited since his student years, but he remembered the library's special collections, dusty rooms filled with boxes of archives and forgotten papers. He had called ahead, asking for someone who might know about French political movements of the 1950s. They had directed him to Dr. Lionel Harrington, a retired historian who still kept an office on the third floor. Daniel found him there, hunched over a stack of journals, his glasses perched crookedly on his nose. He was a thin man, white-haired, with a kind of restless energy in his hands. When Daniel introduced himself and explained what he was looking for, the old scholar's eyes lit up with curiosity. Adrian Rousseau, you say? Harrington repeated, tapping his chin. Yes, the name does sound familiar. Give me a moment. He shuffled through a drawer and pulled out a folder, worn at the edges. He laid it on the desk, dust rising in a faint cloud. Inside were clippings, photocopies, and notes written in Harrington's precise hand. Rousseau, he said, flipping through the pages. Ah, here, yes, Adrian Rousseau. He was active in Paris during the mid-50s. A charismatic figure by all accounts. Connected to student movements, demonstrations, and depending on who you asked, something more dangerous. Daniel leaned forward. Dangerous how? Harrington adjusted his glasses. The 1950s in France were turbulent years. Colonial wars abroad, political unrest at home. Some young men became firebrands, idealists, agitators. Rousseau was among them. He spoke passionately against the government, against the war in Algeria. Some saw him as a hero, others as a threat. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. His mother's words from the hidden letter echoed in his head. They say you are dangerous. They watch me when I return home. So he was political, Daniel murmured. Very much so, Harrington confirmed. But politics in that era was not polite debate. There were clashes in the streets, police surveillance, even arrests. Some of Rousseau's associates vanished. Rumor has it he fled Paris under pressure, though whether from the police or from enemies of another kind, I cannot say. Daniel swallowed hard. Do you know if he came here, to this town? Harrington blinked, surprised. Here? No, I hadn't heard that. Why do you ask? Daniel hesitated. He hadn't told anyone outside his family the full truth, but something in Harrington's steady gaze urged him on. Because I think he knew my mother. The historian's brows lifted. Ah, then this is more personal than academic. He sat back, steepling his fingers. If Rousseau was here, then it makes sense. A man fleeing turmoil might well seek quiet refuge abroad. But, he added with a sigh, wherever he went, he vanished from the record. After 1957, his name all but disappears. To historians, that usually means one of two things. Either he assumed another identity or he died. The word died struck Daniel like a stone. He thought of the suitcase, carefully preserved. The photographs, the scarf, the pen. His mother's silence. Had she buried her past not because Adrian was gone from her life, but because he was gone from the world? Harrington studied him closely. Young man, if you have a personal stake in this, let me give you advice. The past is a dangerous country. You may find answers you're not prepared for. Daniel's jaw tightened. I need to know anyway. The old scholar nodded slowly, then slid a photocopy across the desk. It was an article from a French newspaper, dated November 1956. The headline read, Student demonstrations turn violent Rousseau among the leaders. The grainy photograph showed a man shouting in the crowd, fist raised, eyes ablaze. Even through the blur of print, Daniel recognized him. Adrian. His stomach churned. This was the fire his mother had written about, the passion that both drew her to him and frightened her. He left Harrington's office with the photocopy tucked carefully into his coat. As he walked back through the university halls, his thoughts swirled. Adrian was not just a lover. He was a rebel, a man hunted by authorities, a man who lived with danger at his heels. And if his mother had chosen to leave him, maybe it wasn't just heartbreak that guided her, it was survival. But as Daniel drove home, another thought gnawed at him. If Adrian had vanished from history after 1957, then how had his photograph ended up hidden in the attic? Someone must have kept it safe. Someone must have known more than they ever admitted. And Daniel suspected that his mother's silence wasn't the end of Adrian's story. It was only the beginning. Part 9, the second twist, bloodlines. The wind was sharp that evening when Daniel returned home. He climbed the attic stairs almost without thinking, his legs carrying him toward the suitcase as though the object itself were pulling him back. He set the historian's photocopy on the table beside the other relics, the photograph of Adrian, the scarf, the pen, the hidden letter from his mother. Together, they looked like fragments of a puzzle whose shape he was only beginning to see. But there was one corner of the suitcase he hadn't examined thoroughly, a false lining at the bottom. He remembered noticing it before, the way the wood beneath the fabric felt uneven, as if something were hidden beneath. With a deep breath, Daniel fetched a pocket knife and carefully pried at the seam. The lining lifted with a soft rip, releasing a faint, musty smell of aged paper. Inside, he found a thin leather envelope tied with string. His hands shook as he untied it. Inside were more documents, official ones, birth certificates, letters, a marriage license. And then, his breath caught his own name. Daniel Whitmore, born May 1958. But the father's line was not blank. It read, Adrian Rousseau. The room spun around him. He sank into the chair, the paper trembling in his grasp. His father. His father. All his life, he had been told his father had died young, an ordinary man scarcely spoken of. He had never questioned it. But here, in his hands, was a document that told a different story. His father had not been some nameless absence. He had been Adrian Rousseau, the man in the photographs, the man in the scarf, the man who had set the streets of Paris on fire with his voice. Daniel's heart pounded in his ears. He looked around the attic as though expecting his mother to step out of the shadows, to explain everything. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered hoarsely into the emptiness. The silence pressed heavy against him. He pulled out the other documents, scanning them with frantic eyes. One was a letter of recommendation for employment, written in English, dated 1957. It was addressed to a local workshop in their town. Adrian had been here, working, hiding, trying to build a new life. Another was a faded photograph, Adrian standing beside Elise, his arm around her shoulders. She was smiling shyly, her head tilted toward him, and in her arms, bundled in a blanket, was a baby. Daniel's throat tightened. The baby was him. He clutched the photograph to his chest, eyes burning. His mother had known, of course. She had chosen to keep the truth hidden, perhaps to protect him, perhaps to protect herself. But the cost was staggering. He had grown up thinking himself the son of absence, of shadows. Now he knew he was the son of a man who had been both passionate and feared, both admired and hunted. A man whose blood ran hot with conviction, a man whose fire frightened even those who loved him. And suddenly, Daniel understood something with chilling clarity. The storm of restlessness that had always lived inside him, the yearning for answers, the hunger for meaning, was not just his own. It was inheritance. But if Adrian Rousseau was his father, what had happened to him? Why had his mother erased him from their lives? As Daniel stared at the photograph, his phone buzzed on the table, startling him. He glanced at the screen, Aunt Margaret. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with the weight of the truth in his chest, he answered. Her voice came quiet, hesitant. Daniel, I heard you've been asking about your mother's past, about Adrian. He swallowed hard. Yes, and I think I know the truth now. He was my father, wasn't he? There was a long silence on the other end. Then, softly, his aunt replied, Yes. The word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything he had ever believed. Why didn't anyone tell me? His voice cracked. Because your mother made me promise. She wanted to protect you. She was afraid the past would catch up, afraid that what happened to him would happen to you. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. What happened to him? Another pause, longer this time. Then, in a trembling whisper, his aunt said, Adrian didn't just disappear, Daniel. He was betrayed. Part 10, The Betrayal. Daniel gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white. His aunt's words echoed in his ears. He was betrayed. The attic suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in as if the very air was listening. Tell me everything, Daniel said, his voice low, steady, though his heart was racing. On the other end, Margaret exhaled shakily. I wasn't supposed to. Your mother made me swear, but you found too much already. Maybe it's time you knew. Daniel waited, breath caught in his throat. After Adrian came here, he tried to make a life, Margaret began. He worked at the iron workshop in town, kept his head down, but he was never a man who could disappear. His passion, his ideals, they burned too brightly. He spoke to a few men here, sympathizers, about France, about justice. He couldn't help himself. And someone told the wrong ears. Daniel's mind flashed back to the newspaper clipping. Adrian with his fist raised. A man too alive to blend into shadows. Who, Daniel whispered, who betrayed him? Margaret hesitated. It was someone close, someone he trusted. A coworker at the workshop who owed money, who was desperate. He told the authorities where Adrian was. French intelligence, they still had eyes here. They wanted him silenced. Daniel shut his eyes, bile rising in his throat. He pictured Adrian, his father, thinking he had found safety, unaware that danger had followed him even across borders. What did they do to him? Margaret's voice cracked. One evening, he didn't come home. Your mother waited all night. The next morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just a few words. He won't trouble you anymore. She never saw him again. No body, no grave, just gone. The attic went silent, except for the thundering of Daniel's heart. He felt his world tilt. Grief for a man he had never known, fury at the injustice, sorrow for his mother who had carried this secret alone. She told everyone he had left her, Margaret continued, her tone heavy with sympathy. It was easier that way, to say he abandoned her rather than to explain the truth that he was taken, erased. She thought if she buried the memory, if she kept you away from it, you'd be safe. Daniel pressed the phone to his ear, his other hand trembling over the photograph of Adrian holding him as a baby. She carried that pain her whole life, Margaret whispered. But she loved him, Daniel, and she loved you even more. She wanted you to have a life free of shadows. Tears blurred Daniel's vision. His chest felt tight, as though all the years of silence, all the unspoken words of his mother, had collapsed on him at once. He had always wondered why she looked away whenever he asked about his father, why her eyes sometimes held sorrow too deep for words. Now he knew. It wasn't absence she was hiding, it was loss. Violent, stolen loss. When he finally spoke, his voice was ragged. She shouldn't have had to carry that alone. Margaret's reply was soft. No, but she did. And now, Daniel, now it's yours to carry. The call ended, but Daniel didn't move. He sat in the dim light of the attic, surrounded by the relics of two lives entwined, his mother's silence, his father's fire. He thought of Adrian's scarf, still faintly scented of smoke and earth. He thought of the pen, perhaps once used to write manifestos, letters, promises. He thought of the hidden photograph of a family that had almost been. And he realized, with aching clarity, that betrayal had stolen more than Adrian's life. It had stolen Daniel's right to know his father, to be raised in the truth of who he was. But even so, the suitcase had given him something his mother never could. A bridge to the man whose blood ran in his veins. Daniel wiped his face, steadied his breath, and whispered into the quiet. I know you now, Father, and I won't let you be forgotten. Part 11, The Resolution. The attic felt different that morning. Sunlight slanted through the small window, dust motes dancing like tiny stars in the warmth. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor, the suitcase open before him. He didn't need to sort the letters or photographs anymore. He had read every word, examined every fragment, and traced every story back to its source. Elise had lived a life he never imagined. Adrian had burned brightly, dangerously, and been torn from her world by betrayal. And yet, despite the tragedy, despite the hidden truths, life had gone on. Daniel's eyes fell on the scarf. Silk, faded but soft, carrying the ghost of her perfume. He lifted it gently, feeling a strange connection to a mother he had known as Anna but who had once been Elise, the same woman who had loved fiercely, lost painfully, and protected him with every secret she carried. He whispered, almost to himself, I understand now, Mom. I understand why you hid it, why you built a quiet life. You were brave in ways I never knew. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were not just for sorrow. They were for awe, for the courage it took to survive, to love, and to protect a child from a world too dangerous to explain. Daniel rose slowly, looking around the attic one last time. The suitcase would remain here, a testament to lives entwined and choices made in shadows. But he knew he could carry their stories forward, not with fear, not with resentment, but with understanding and reverence. He stepped outside into the garden. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of late summer flowers. He closed his eyes and imagined Adrian, fiery, passionate, alive in the world of memory, and Elise, strong, quiet, carrying a love too heavy for words. And he thought of himself, not just as Daniel Whitmore, the son of absence, but as the child of a lineage of courage, passion, and resilience. The past, he realized, was not only about what had been lost, it was about what endured. Later that evening, he wrote in a blank notebook of his own, sitting at the old desk that had once belonged to his mother. He wrote of discoveries, of pain, of hidden love. But he also wrote of hope, of family, and of the way stories, no matter how secret, shape us. For Daniel, the suitcase had become more than a relic. It was a mirror, reflecting not just the lives of those who came before, but the life he could now live, honestly, fully, with the knowledge of where he came from and the strength of what had been endured. He carefully placed the scarf on the notebook, closed the suitcase, and carried it to the corner of the attic where it would stay. Not forgotten, but honored. As he descended the stairs, the house felt lighter, as if it too had been waiting for him to understand. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Daniel stood for a moment, breathing in the evening air, feeling the pulse of life, his life, steady, alive, and informed by the past. And in that moment, he understood the lesson his mother had tried to impart through silence, letters, and hidden photographs. The past may be hidden, but understanding it allows us to live with courage. The choices of those who came before shape us, but they do not define us. What we do with that knowledge does. Daniel smiled softly, turning back toward the house. Tomorrow he would face the world differently. Not with fear, not with resentment, but with love, with remembrance, and with the quiet, profound strength that comes from truly knowing where you come from. The old suitcase remained in the attic, a vessel of memory, mystery, and legacy. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt ready, not just to live, but to honor life itself.